so I can do that. So I hit record.
Okay, so you're now recording it.
Yeah, but I'm on my iPhone. I'm trying to figure out how to give him authority. So bear with me, everyone. Sorry.
All the buttons are in a different place. I know.
I know.
I tell you, I hate phones. You know, I don't like my phone. But
Not for meetings.
yeah,
So there are those who do.
I know.
Holy
You
crap.
like the phone? That's great.
But how? All right. On my phone, whiteboard. Yeah. Wow. That's very limited what I could do on my iPhone. I don't see anything here.
Can you make like Ron the host, and then he could give me screen sharing rights?
Yeah, I'm trying to find how to do that because I can't find out how to do that at all.
Probably in participants. Have you got a participants button?
I'm looking. Shoot.
Yeah, at the right of Ron's name, it'll probably have a little.
Also possible.
Yeah. You would expect that. I'm looking for contacts. Maybe that's it. No. I don't see it anywhere on here on the iPhone. So hold on.
No participants?
No. All right.
I only know the PC interface, the Mac interface, actually.
You know, it's always something, you know, last week I was doing a talk, and at the beginning, what happened? I mean, it seems like every single time something goes wrong at the beginning. It's like normal now.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is crazy. This is the first time this has happened. Back to the meeting.
It's not like on TV where, like, you know, everything works. You know, people just go boom, 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 and things are uploaded, and it's not like that.
All right, here you go. Make co-host. God, I found it. So Ron, you're the co-host.
Oh, cool.
And let me see, Cliff. There you go, Cliff. You are now the co-host.
Okay.
Now
you
you can
can
have.
sure without me doing anything.
Okay. I
Great.
actually, Ron, did you write that book, Managing the Unmanageable?
I did.
I want to hear about that. But another time, I'll read about it.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Let me share my screen. Okay. Anyway, by the way, Jay mentioned that he was in my course, and he was a really good student. So
Really?
yeah, believe it or not. Very engaging, lots of insightful things, you know, new ideas. It was really great.
In other words, I talked a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, everyone's here to hear about constructive agility in Agile 2. So what the heck is that? Okay, well, let's find out. This is me. I'm not going to bore you with it. You can tell I have gray hair. I've done a lot of different things. I was a nuclear engineer, believe it or not, a really long time ago. And then I studied operations research. And I also was an electrical engineer. And then I built compilers, hardware compilers, actually. And then I created a company that grew to 200 people. And we built B2B things for like FedEx and McKesson Pharmaceuticals and United Overseas Bank and blah, 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 blah. And then I got into consulting, helping organizations to use Agile because we were early adopters of Agile methods back in 2000 when extreme programming was new. And I ended up writing a book about using Agile ideas to build high assurance systems. But anyway, more recently, I launched this movement. I got a team of 15 people together, and we defined something called Agile 2. And the impetus for that was that the core ideas of Agile were really, really good, and they weren't new. You know, as Jay said, back in 2001, these ideas of Agile were not new to us who had been around for a while. It was like, yes, finally getting back to what works. You know, because during the 90s, we kind of went off the rails with waterfall and stuff. Before that, it wasn't like that. But anyway, the Agile Manifesto was like, whoo, finally, a breath of fresh air, back to common sense. But then things went kind of crazy. We started getting into very extreme things and dogmatic things and kind of one size fits all. So Agile 2 is an attempt to be smarter and more scientific about it, and benefits from like learning theory and behavioral psychology and cognitive science, leadership theory, and a lot of things that really we should be using to inform us about how to achieve agility. And just kind of a little insight on, like Jay said, some of us have had good experiences before Agile that were very Agile, and I myself did, very much so. And it was mostly in the late 80s, not during the 90s. It was the late 80s. I was on a series of teams that were really successful and were really incredible experiences. And what characterized those, the teams had no process. There was no process, N-O period, process period, no process. So you don't need a friggin' process. I know, because I've seen it where you don't, but what those teams had is they had leadership. It wasn't servant leadership, but it was close. It was leadership that was very inquisitive, very issue focused, problem solving, and a culture, leadership culture where the best idea won. It's like issues would come up and we discuss it and we go from office to office. What about this? What about that? We whiteboard, and it was a rich experience, and things friggin' worked. We did a huge amount of collaboration, even though we had private offices, but we were co-located, and we ran full automated regression tests every night and automatically screen scraped to collect the results. We worked against the feature backlog. We were all highly empowered, and it was a full stack team. And this was 1980s. So, before the Agile Manifesto, it wasn't all waterfall. So
how big was your team, Cliff?
Let's see, there were a series of teams, but this was building compilers, so quite actually advanced compilers, Ada-like languages. And the teams were, those teams were probably 15 people or so, counting everybody. I think probably about 15. Okay. So anyway, the reason for mentioning this is, because I know what can work, and so when things have gone kind of wrong, it's like, wait a second, we can fix this, because people today seem to really struggle, and it's not that complicated. We're making it too complicated. And also a lot has changed. When the Agile Manifesto came out in 2001, things were different. We had monolithic and 3-tier applications, and large scale meant you had 100,000 users. Today large scale is internet scale, which means you have 100 million users or more. So 3 orders of magnitude different. And and today market share is often more important than profitability. I don't want to get into that, but things have changed a lot, and so you would think Agile, but to tell you the truth, it's not really that things have changed. It's really that we kind of took the Agile Manifesto and kind of didn't use it quite right. It's actually a very sophisticated document, and the thing is, we need agility, and we found that out during the pandemic. Agility is really absolutely essential for most organizations today, especially competitive businesses. Because things are more dynamic today. They really are. So we have to make Agile work. We really have to make it work. And the time for this talk is kind of short, but what I have done recently in some of my talks is I've had a follow-up talk where we have a discussion. So I'm wondering, maybe that would be an appropriate thing here. Maybe we'll have time afterwards. I can stay later if people are interested. So I'm just going to move on from this rather than actually asking you the question I want to ask, because otherwise I won't get through this. But I really want to know, what issues have you had to deal with within your organization where you really need agility, where agility is kind of crucial. So maybe think about that. But the dilemma, the fly in the ointment is that our approach to agility hasn't really worked, and you can blame this whoever you want. You can say the organizations didn't do it right, the coaches didn't explain it right, or they're missing pieces, or it's not right even maybe, or whatever the explanation is, something's wrong. And so we have to figure out what that is. And that was our effort here. The first thing we did, we had a global team and we did a retrospective on the state of Agile. So it was entirely bottom up. It wasn't like a bunch of people got together and said, well, I think, we should have this principle now. No, it was the opposite of that. It was what's working and what's not working. And when at least two people identified the same issue, it got identified as something to discuss. And we started to have issue-focused discussions. We created Google Docs around specific issues. And we would talk those through and have emails. We had emails indented 15 levels deep in multiple colors. We had issue-focused documents that were like so complex, but got simpler and simpler because we'd kind of tease things apart and find out where the sticking points were. So it was entirely bottom up, starting from a retrospective. Okay. So there are a lot of narratives. I mean, this is not really in the Agile Manifesto mentions self-organizing team, but it doesn't say all teams should be self-organizing. It does not say that. But we somehow seem to assume that that's what it says, and it does not say that, and it shouldn't say that. And the thing is about self-organizing autonomous teams, that's kind of an ideal, and it's an outcome. It's not where you start from. It's not the prescription for how to get there. It's like saying be healthy. If you go to a doctor and the doctor says, well, be healthy, that doesn't help you. What the doctor should say is eat right and exercise and so on. Well, self-organizing autonomous team, that's like saying be healthy. It's an outcome. If you have a healthy culture and you have agility promoting behaviors and these things on the right, if you have those things, you will end up with mostly autonomous, mostly self-organizing teams. That's where you'll end up. That's not where you start. So Agile 2 is informed very deeply by leadership theory, operations research, which happens to something I studied, cognitive science and behavioral science. And I'm not going to go into that, but it's science-based. And do we really think, and I bet a lot of people here don't think this, do we really think that a big process will make an organization agile? Really? Something like this is going to make us agile? I'm sorry, but I don't think so. It won't. It absolutely will not. My company, Agile 2 Academy, every single company we talk to that's using a process like that is having not good results. Every single one. It doesn't mean it didn't improve some things, but usually it causes more problems than it solves. It tends to actually make you less agile. It might make things more repeatable, and might improve some quality, and it might make work planning easier, but it actually makes you less agile. Is a very common outcome of processes like this. So here's what actual agility looks like. Forget agile with a capital A. What does actual agility look like? Well, suppose you have a bunch of teams that are working, and suppose some issue pops up, like, uh-oh, what do we do? And it turns out the issue cuts across several teams. And guess what? it actually cuts across several products. So, a team can't just decide, oh, we're going to fix this ourselves, because it affects several other products. And you know what? That's a common situation today. That's very common. It's very common in hardware design, where you have assemblies that are used by multiple different systems, multiple different products. It's very common in the microservice world, where you have core microservices that are used by 50 different customer-facing products. So this is a very common situation. So what do you do? Well, in a very process-driven approach, you would probably be inclined to follow the process. Now, you don't have to. You can be smart. If you're a very smart release train lead or product manager or Scrum, whatever, or just a team member, you could behave differently. But the process encourages you to do this. Where, okay, when's our next planning event? Okay, well, when that happens, we'll figure out what to do. But in an agile response would be something like this. Someone notices, there's an issue, and they look around, who's affected by this? Who needs to be involved in this discussion? And since it reaches across other products, they probably need to get someone higher up involved. Because if a team member goes and talks to some team members and some other product teams, they'll probably get, we're busy, sorry you have that problem, but we don't have time to deal with that right now. And by the way, who are you? It's kind of how they'll look at it. And so you probably need to get your product manager or the delivery lead or something for your area to go talk to theirs, to get their attention. But in any case, however you do it, the right people need to be pulled into a discussion. And that discussion needs to be effective. It needs to progress intelligently, inclusively, dialectically, and it needs to be an honest discussion. So so the culture has a big impact. If you have a competitive culture where product areas compete, or don't trust each other, it won't be an honest discussion. It will be an antagonistic and bargaining kind of discussion instead of a seek the best answer discussion. So a good discussion needs to happen, and it needs to move along quickly. It can't languish. It can't be like, okay, we spent an hour talking about it. We still don't know what to do. All right, well, next week we'll revisit that. No, it can't work like that. It has to be, okay, we didn't finish talking about it today. What's your earliest time tomorrow? And we need to drive that to resolution. And we need to drive it to resolution where we're sure enough to try it. We're not sure it will work, but we're at a point where, okay, we just need to try it and see what happens. And that needs to happen quickly, in hours or days, not weeks or months. That's agility. And a key point here is that true agility does not result from process. It happens outside of process. True agility happens outside of process, and it results from the behavior of individuals, not from the process. Agility cuts across process. Agility does not come from process. There's no such thing as an agile process. And when you have many different products and issues come up, like here's a picture of an engine that's used by all 4 of these products. Actually, you probably wouldn't use it in that ship unless it's a small ship. Well, it might be a boat, might be a commercial boat. In any case, they all use that same assembly. And what happens when there's something to do with that assembly that needs to change that affects all of those? So agility is the ability to deal with cross-cutting issues as they arise in an aggressive, timely, intelligent, and honest manner. That's a big ask in a complex ecosystem where you have lots of different stakeholders. That's a big ask. The challenge with agility is not at the team level. Teams are easy. You know, setting up a team to operate well is easy. EASY. I'm sorry, it's easy. The hard problem is the ecosystem, where you have lots of teams and lots of products and lots of initiatives that are competing for things, hopefully in a friendly way. That's the hard part. And you know, if you've ever read Team Topologies by Manuel Pais and Matthew Skelton, I know Manuel, I don't know the other guy. But if you've ever read that, they were, you know, they address this ecosystem issue, which is really where the hard problem is. Another thing is that agility is conversation-based, because when those issues arise, they need to get talked through in an effective manner. So you have to have effective conversations. You have to have conversations that are inquisitive and appreciative and you know, a lot of Socratic type inquiry happening instead of statement-based conversations. And if you look at companies that are highly agile, and this is not a celebration of Elon Musk. This is not about Elon Musk. This is about the company SpaceX and the kind of culture that exists there, which I know quite a bit about. I've interviewed people who work there. And it's very conversation-based. It's not process-based. They have processes, but they change their processes constantly. Processes are intentional. They create process when they need to. They start out with no process. It's entirely conversation-based, issue-based, and problem-solving. That's their culture. Here's an interview of a fellow named Dan Rasky. He's a scientist, and he's world-renowned expert in spacecraft heat shields. He spent a year at SpaceX, and what he has to say is kind of interesting.
And with all that going on, we had one standing meeting a week. One, okay, not 15, okay, at NASA. If we were working the same project, oh my God, we'd have a dozen standing meetings, you know, and with maybe tens or hundreds of people in each of those meetings, you know, and most people have to do with statusing, right? So most of the time you're sitting and listening, right? Because someone else is talking. And then you find that there's very little time for you to work on your own, because you're going from one status meeting to another status meeting to another status meeting.
Yeah.
And so here at SpaceX, we have one standing meeting a week, 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. Okay, so it's in the middle of the week, so you can kind of status in the middle. And it was at 11 a.m. so that when 12 noon came along, everyone wanted to adjourn so we could go have lunch. Okay, and that was it. And that was enough.
Sound familiar with regarding calendars full of meetings? That's a horrible problem today. It's dumbing us down. It means we can't have deep conversations about anything. There's no time for these ad hoc conversations that are the core to agility, because our calendars are full. The Agile 2 book talks a lot about that and how to solve that, by the way. So, you know, the thing is, you know, we talked about how behavior is the root of agility, not process, but it's not enough. You need a culture that supports the behaviors that you want. I mentioned that if, you know, for these constructive conversations to happen that cut across areas, you need to have a culture that's non-competitive internally, because that's the only way that people will be having conversations that are earnest, where they're trying to find the best solution rather than what's best for them. And people also need knowledge. They need to be armed with knowledge of lean and flow patterns and all those techniques for how to move things quickly and how to manage risk in real time. You know, what we call DevOps techniques in the IT sphere. You know, so those patterns, if you don't know those patterns, you're going to use the patterns you know, which if you're trained in PMI, you'll use you ask someone, how do you improve quality? If they're trained in PMI techniques, they'll say, well, add more checks and plan more, make more detailed plans, is what they'll say, you know, which will really slow you down. It's not that it's wrong, it's just won't achieve agility. You know, someone who's trained in lean and flow techniques will say, well, let's add some feedback loops. Let's increase our test coverage or something, you know, they'll have a different mental toolbox. So you have to have the knowledge also of the solution patterns. So what the heck is constructive agility? You know, I mentioned Agile too, but this new term, constructive agility, well, the term constructive comes from the term constructive culture, which is we looked at a lot of culture models, and the one we ended up selecting is the human synergistics culture model, which is described in this book. It's a fantastic book, Creating Constructive Cultures. And it's been used with over 30,000 organizations. And it's a very fine-grained model. And the tools that they have for culture assessment are very mature. And the term constructive culture comes from that model. And it's basically equivalent if you read Nicole Forsgren's book about her work on DevOps, and she talks about the Western model, which defines a generative culture. It's pretty much the same thing. So, so constructive agility, the whole idea is including culture in your approach from the beginning and kind of making it central, making culture, behavior, and knowledge central. And constructive agility is, think of it as a journey. It's a roadmap for defining your own processes as unique and embedding cultural development and behavioral development and knowledge development as an embedded component and the central component of that. Process is secondary. Process is something you create along the way and then discard if you need to. Process is intentional. Processes come and go. But what stays and what you enrich and build on is the culture and the behaviors and the knowledge. So in the course of establishing these things from the beginning, you end up with agility. It's an outcome. And you end up with as the process you end up creating highly autonomous, fairly, self-managing teams, not entirely. Team in an organization, no team is completely self-managing or completely autonomous. But those are aspirations. Those are good things. But they're not absolutes. But it's the wrong thing to focus on. It's an outcome. The thing to focus on is these things. And in the course of defining your processes, you define strategies that you're constantly adjusting and refining and changing and discarding. These strategies are just intentional choices, intentional decisions about, well, what kind of culture do we want? And how are we going to create that? What's our people strategy? How are we going to get the people we need? How are we going to enable people to grow into the skills that we need and that they want? What's our tech strategy? What's our product strategy? What's our value strategy? So all these things are things that you intentionally think about along the way, and you constantly are elaborating these and refining them and sometimes discarding them to pivot. And these inform what kinds of processes you might need. And it's very important to have minimal process for whatever you're doing. If you're doing something that is very high risk, like where there's people are going to fly on it and it's safety related, you need a lot of process at the end point. Like when SpaceX built the Dragon capsule, they had almost no process during development. But then as it got closer to flight certification, where it was going to carry astronauts, they started adding a lot of process. So they changed their process over time to meet the need. Process is something they designed with intention. It's not something they started with. And I mentioned meeting time. Reclaim your meeting time. Okay, well, I don't want to go in the whole theory about that because we talk all about that in here, but constructive agility is event-based. It tries to steer you away from defining any recurring meetings. Recurring meetings are by and large toxic. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have any. People sometimes like some recurring meetings. Sometimes it's very good for team cohesion and so on. So if you feel it's beneficial, do it. But start with a default of no recurring meetings and then add the ones you feel are really beneficial. But that means people need to always be paying attention and always thinking. So for example, if you complete something, so now something works that didn't work before. So you're kind of like, okay, I did that. Or a team finishes something, or an individual. That's the time to reflect. How well did that go? That's the time to retrospect when you finish. Another time to retrospect is when something's not working well. Okay, we're struggling with this. Maybe we're approaching it wrong. Let's step back and think about our whole approach here. That's the time to retrospect. Setting up a retrospective every 2 weeks or something like that doesn't make any sense. You should always be retrospecting when events occur, when things change. So it tries to encourage you, there are no rules in this constructive agility approach, but it advocates for using an event-based approach. And the result of that is our calendars are empty. Our calendars are empty. We don't have any recurring meetings. There's no every 3 weeks a program meeting, or every whatever, a team level 2 meeting where you have, leaders of multiple teams all get it. There's none of that recurring stuff that fills up everybody's calendars. We're Agile coaches that work with 4 teams. They have to attend 4 stand-ups. There's none of that. Our calendars are empty, except for the recurring meetings we really want. Like if you have a recurring meeting with someone who's a stakeholder who you want to maintain a relationship with, and you meet with them once a month, say, how are you doing? Are you happy? Yeah, have that. That's high value. All the other meetings are event-based. Okay, something's done. Okay, we need to discuss it. We need to think about how that went. Okay, who needs to be in that? Not everybody. Maybe everyone can attend, but who really needs to be in it? And let's really go deep on that. Let's really spend 2 hours and think through a bunch of issues. Let's go deep, because meetings are so valuable. You're getting a bunch of brains in the room at the same time or on Zoom, and you're going deep into an issue. That's the goal. That's what we want. We don't want meetings where people are just perfunctorily attending and then basically not contributing to most of it. And people are saying, okay, this happened and that happened. Yeah, I could have found that out by just, if you had just sent us an email about that, I could have learned about that. So save meetings for events, or moments, when you need to go deep on something. And then our calendars are largely empty, and you can have ad hoc deep conversations as individuals. Okay, and there are no rules. There's no big map of practices. It's not a framework. It's not a process framework. It's real knowledge. So leadership theory, the right elements of the applicable elements of behavioral psychology, that inform us about how do people collaborate well? How do people create? How do people think? How do people communicate? There's a lot of research on that, on all of those things. Well, what is that? And how, what parts of that relate to this? Cognitive science, operations research, which is really the underpinnings of lean and flow and DevOps. What are the applicable models there that can inform us? So that's kind of real stuff. Oh, okay. And, I mentioned, it's not some manifesto or some framework someone just created because they think they personally think, like it or something. It reflects what actually is what's known about these related subject matter areas. And fundamentally, it's a learning program. It's like a learning program in which you learn these topics, and you apply these ideas in the course of defining strategies and then defining your own processes in a progressive manner. But you don't really learn until you try things, and that's the reason why you're applying it and defining your own processes. So there's actually a model behind this, You know, we call it the constructive agility model. And it's basically the three things I mentioned before: the agility promoting behaviors, which is Agile 2. Rob Cook, the founder of Human Synergistics, has been working with us because he feels that Agile 2 is a very robust model for agility promoting behaviors. Also a constructive culture, and then the lean and flow patterns, the knowledge component. So I think we're getting close to done, but you know, just kind of summarize this: process does not give you agility. Process is the wrong place to start. You need process, but that's not the place to start. You need to define your own processes. I mentioned that, you know, my best dev team experiences were on teams that had no process. You know, but over time we started to define little processes. You know, like I remember at one point, in one of those projects, I created the tooling for collecting our regression test results and putting them into a VAX database. I think it took me 2 days to code that. You know, we had no tooling back then for any of that stuff, but it was just like what you did. You know, and then someone else had the job of kicking off the test run every night, you know, that would run all the regression tests. You know, so we defined processes as we needed them, instead of starting with a process. And that was enabled by the fact that we were very issue focused. We were problem solving. And you learn in the course of doing that. You have a sense of ownership over how you're doing your work, which is really critical. That learning is actually the key thing. If you start with someone else's process, you've skipped the learning. Usually I like to end them with some challenge questions to reflect on, you know, the organizations that we work in. So for your organization, maybe ask yourself, is it true or false? When cross-cutting issues arise, they get discussed by the right people and resolved quickly. Just think to yourself, is that generally true or false in where I am working at right now? And true or false, your senior leadership understands DevOps ideas. That's usually in the questionnaires we've given out, usually that's a low percentage. And why does that matter? Because, and this is something Agile 2 talks about, everyone who contributes to the value stream in some way needs to have a basic understanding of every aspect of the value stream. They don't have to know it in depth. They don't have to even be able to do it themselves, but they need to know kind of the working pieces. They need to understand so they can participate in holistic conversations. So DevOps, you know, if you build software or digital artifacts, DevOps is highly relevant. SpaceX uses a lot of DevOps techniques, even though they build spaceships, not software. Well, they do make some software, but their main product is hardware. They use a lot of DevOps. They don't call it that, but that's what it is. So DevOps is a bunch of really ideas rooted in operations research about, you know, how you manage risk in real time, you know, by defining feedback loops in the form of automated tests or high frequency tests. And that's how you manage risk, by managing the test coverage. It's fundamentally real-time risk management for development. And you know, everyone on the business needs to understand that concept. They need to know the concept. True or false, you have sufficient leadership happening at the integration level. Okay, how many teams are in your product and in your ecosystem? And do you feel that there is leadership over how those teams are all organizing and coordinating and managing their integration testing and all of the stuff they have to do together? You know, and this is where team topologies play. You know, is there leadership around that ecosystem and how it's operated? And true or false, real users are involved in conceiving the product. Or is there a product owner just saying, well, I think it should do this, I think it should do that? Real users are actually involved in coming up with the ideas for the product. Is that true or false? if you want to know more, if you go to our website, you can click on more info and then Constructive Agility is at the top. Or you can, there's also talks and podcasts. And we gave a webinar not too long ago. I'm losing my voice. And there's also we had a public discussion about it 2 weeks later. And there's a kind of really, I'm losing my voice. And that link is here too. Let's see. Oh, my voice made it. I have another talk tomorrow at 7 a.m. I hope I have my voice. Anyway, this is us. And I would love to have any questions or ideas.
Okay, I got my Mac back up and running. So, we're open up to any questions that anyone may have. There's a lot, I mentioned this, some people may consider this kind of radical thinking, minimal process and all the stuff that Cliff said, but hey, we've been doing this for decades successfully, and it can be done. I think the other big question, that many may have is, why does organizations tend to want to purchase or follow a very structured process to begin? SAFe is the footprint's increasing. Scrum is the #1 framework out there in the world that everyone uses. I guess my question is, I think I know the answer, but my question is, why do organizations and people gravitate to those kind of things to help them move or do this agile transformation?
Yeah, because they want a repeatable solution that they can just roll out. I mean, that's what happened. That's why waterfall took off. In the 80s, people didn't use waterfall. It was a rarity. IBM had a methodology that was kind of waterfall-like, and there were, but they weren't widely used. Waterfall really took off in the 90s, where you had these big procurements. You probably remember this, Jay. And you had people who had never built software defining projects, like, we'll contract out requirements, then we'll contract out design, planning it like that. And programmers are going, are you kidding me? So the same thing is kind of happening with these big frameworks. Like, people who don't really understand how to build things are saying, oh, that looked, it has everything in it. It's got the kitchen sink too. So that check, which are list of things we're looking for. It's got it all. So buy that, and they don't actually know what they're doing. And it's going to implode just like waterfall did. There's going to be a backlash. I see a backlash already. The Agile movement is the backlash against waterfall. I wonder what the backlash will be against these frameworks. It's coming. I guarantee it.
Yeah, so anyone else have any questions? I mean, there's a lot more stuff that Cliff alluded to and links, and I'll just say, Agile 2 is not the only thinking that is out there talking about this. So anyone have any questions, just go ahead and unmute and ask.
I'll ask one. I've got to leave in just a few minutes, but so I'm going to try to sneak my question in early, which is, more often than not, the processless teams I see, I would characterize not as working, but as ad hoc and as chaotic, actually. What differentiated that team? So I've been on one of those teams too, Cliff, back in the day. But what differentiated that for you? What differentiated that team of 10 working on compilers from a ton of ad hoc chaos?
Yes, thank you for asking that. What differentiates it is when you have the right kind of leader. And, the Agile community recoils because, the Agile community equates leader with autocratic boss. And I've had my share of autocratic bosses in my career. It was horrible. But, leadership is what David Marquette talks about and turn the ship around. Leadership, and Nicole Forsgren in Accelerate has a whole chapter on leadership. If you go to SIA-GLOBAL and look at their business agility curriculum, it's all about leadership, like the whole curriculum. Leadership is the key. It's the cornerstone, the right kind of leadership. And but leadership is not one thing. And as Jay knows, in the Agile 2 class, we actually look at a whole range of leadership models that have been studied. And that as Peter Drucker used to say, you need an inside person, an outside person, and a person of action. You need many kinds of leadership for a group of people to be successful. And it doesn't mean they're bosses. It just means they carry, they have the ball, they're on point to worry about certain kinds of things. And it also doesn't mean that they own those things. Someone mentioned in the chat, I think it might've been Jay, he wrote, team members should start conversations with the appropriate people, not rely on managers. That's absolutely right. And then in this case here of these teams back in the 80s that I was on, that was a situation where people were constantly raising issues. And we were constantly going into and out of each other's offices and whiteboarding, and what about this and what about that? But often, a manager can really help. If that manager is the right kind of leader, because if you have an issue that you can't solve yourself and you need to get the attention of another team on another product, you're not going to get their attention unless you're going to have to involve people who have positional authority. I'm sorry, but that's the reality, because they're all busy. They're not going to have the time and mental capacity to deal with your problem unless someone who has a lot of standing in their area says, hey, this is important. We need to stop what we're doing and have this conversation. So we need to have the right kinds of leaders. The right kinds of leaders listen and they say, what do you think? And if they hear a good idea, they say, let's talk that through. And they empower people. And empower doesn't mean you say, okay, do that and good luck. Empower means you say, okay, I think you can handle that. And you figure out how to do it. And let me know if I can help. And let's talk through any issues you have. And, and then you check in on them constantly, and not to micromanage them or criticize, but you just see how they're doing and help them discuss. In these particular teams, they were led by a guy named Carl, and he would talk to everyone on the team every morning, every day. He would make the rounds. He'd go into your office. He'd sit down. How are you doing? He'd not only want to know what you're working on, he wanted to know how you were going to do it. And he was always friendly and supportive. He was never critical. He'd make suggestions, but it was always a suggestion. Sometimes he'd get up and whiteboard, and then he'd say, okay, I'll talk to you later. It was always a supportive, when he left, you felt like there was someone who really cared and was really interested in helping. It had just talked to you. That's good leadership. And these teams that were highly effective, that's what they had.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, so I heard what I would consider to be self-organizing teams there, from the standpoint that everyone acts as a leader in my definition of a self-organizing team, including the intern, brings up from their experience and their expertise, chips in when it's appropriate and when they think it's appropriate. The team will decide, but it gives them the psychological safety to do that, as well as that manager who supports and enables an environment that's open to that. Does that sound about right?
Well, yeah. Okay. So when you ask people, what do they mean by self-organized? You hear different things.
Yes, you do.
Self-organized, it's tautological. It's It lexically means they self-organize. It lexically means there's no one else intervening or anything. It's completely up to them. Now, if someone says self-organize, and by the way, what I really mean by that is that they mostly self-organize. That's what we generally have in a high-functioning team. You know, in this case, you know, Carl, he wasn't just a facilitator. He didn't just empower the team. He often would make decisions, and we were happy for that because he made hard decisions, sometimes involving our, you know, we often were partnered with Texas Instruments and IBM on some of these contracts. And he would make decisions involving them, and he would then fly down to Texas to advocate for something that affected us. And he would, if he saw gaps, he often would he would talk to someone and say, hey, can you take care of this? It's not happening. And then people were glad for that, because they didn't want to deal with, you know, I'm trying to implement this feature in a compiler. I don't want to have to worry about, you know, someone who's going to set up the nightly test run. You know, so he was the, you know, on a team, you need an organizer. You need someone who's an organizer. And that person might just emerge on the team, but if it doesn't, someone needs to like make sure there's someone organizing stuff. You need an advocate for the team. You know, that's Peter Drucker's outside person, someone to make sure that the team has what it needs. And you need an inside person, you know, someone who kind of, where the team respects and trusts and feels like they're kind of watching that everything's okay and making sure the right conversations are happening, because people are busy. People on a team don't have time to all be thinking end to end all the time. They don't, you know, they just don't have the mental capacity. And so they want to feel like there is someone who is like spending all their time thinking holistically.
It's why the last chapter of our book is titled, If You're Agile, What Do Managers Do? The book you were asking about here at the beginning. But about self-organizing teams, you're absolutely right. There's so many definitions of self-organizing teams. You gave one, I disagree with it, but we both agree that doesn't describe. Have you come up with wording that does describe the sort of self-organizing team that has a leader? Have you come up with a word or a couple of words for that? Because I'm searching.
I don't care what we call, as long as we understand what we're saying.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
You know, and then go from there. You know, I'm a little disturbed about the Scrum Guide, in that it now defines self-managing in a way that conflicts with how the term management is used and has been used in multiple fields for decades. You know, it's the way the term manage is used in the Scrum Guide is at severe variance from the term manage is a fairly widely used term in business schools and multiple.
It's an oxymoron, Cliff. Self-managing. It's an oxymoron.
It is. Well, but you know, anyway, as long as, you know, if you point to the Scrum Guide and said that's what I mean, that's okay. But I think it's really caused a lot of confusion. You know, anyway, but Scrum, I don't want to even go there.
Thank you. Gotta run.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Ron.
All right. Any other questions anyone has? Go ahead and ask. You can, you know, take yourself off of mute and ask.
So maybe I can ask. I mean, it's most like a reflection. I don't know why I'm not visible. Okay, now I'm visible. Actually, there is sometimes problems I can face with some of those, that some of the organization, they wanna be more agile, but when you are speaking with their managers and you see that they are not pretty ready for it, and you want to start just from small part. And actually, sometimes I don't know how to prepare the highest managers, that they will have to work a lot. So how to make it, I don't know, how to ask more easy to spare Agile, because really, I have met many organizations. They really, I mean, the people want, some of the institutes want that they already self-organize in Agile way, but still I have seen that some of the managers wasn't ready. So how to combine all of these pieces? This is pretty hard.
Yeah, you know, a lot of managers, you know, they tend to be older, you know, because they become managers, and so they were successful in their career using older approaches. So that's a real challenge. You know, ultimately, you have to be able to have conversations with them. You know, sending them something, you know, it's FaceTime. You have to be able to have conversations, and you know, that comes down to, like, how do you change someone's thinking? And I mean, this is where behavioral psychology comes in, you know, because, you know, people, to change someone's thinking about something, the first step is you have to get them to realize that they need to change their thinking. That's the hardest point, because, you know, managers, they were successful before doing things a certain way. So they think to be successful, they should keep doing that. And basically you have to tell them, no, what has worked for you your whole career won't work now. So
exactly, but how to, you know, how to do in this pretty nice way.
Well, number one, you have to use their vocabulary. So the Agile community makes a huge mistake when they bring in, like, you know, words that are foreign to people from, you know, 20 years ago, who had their career, you know, where we are, but 20 years ago. And, you know, we should use their terminology. Like, instead of saying team happiness, say morale. You know, it might not be exactly what Agile community means, but it's close enough. You know, and, you know, so use their terminology, and then immediately it's familiar ground to them. And so they now, like, feel like there's no, like, you know, language problem. But then you have to start always first appreciatively. You have to ask them what they think. You know, like, you pick a problem area, you know, something that they feel is a problem area, and ask them why they think it's a problem, and what they think about it. And, you know, so it shows them that you respect them, and, you know, you're listening, and, you know, that you heard, that they're heard, you heard them, and that then they become more interested in what you have to say. And this takes time. This is not a 5-minute conversation. You have to have enough time with them, but you have to plant a seed. If you can plant a seed, like, first ask them what they think, and then you're at a critical point. You have an opportunity to place some doubt in them about their assumption. You know, like, how would they solve the problem? Like the example, suppose quality is a problem. Well, how would you improve quality? Well, what do you think? Why do you think quality is a problem? And they'd say, well, because, you know, we're not doing detailed enough specs. No, that's what they might say. You know, we need more control, and we need more detailed tasks so that we can more tightly control the work, or something. You know, that might be what they might think. And so you listen and acknowledge that, because that might make sense for some things. If you're
building, to show them, you know, yes, like step by step, like what is working and what is stop working. And why I'm asking about this, because sometimes when this problem is appearing, it's usually because the organization in some of the parts started to already push them. So they already started to feel offended in some kind of way. So it's a really very delicate, I can say, process.
Yeah, they become invested in rejecting the new trend. So, you know, I found that you have to have these conversations one-on-one. You know, if you do it in a group setting, you're not going to reach them. You have to, you know, first ask them what they think, but then you have to think through, why is it that what they're saying won't work? Like, you know, their thing might work if you had lots of time, but today we want to move quickly. So maybe that's the thing to hone in on. Okay, well, your approach, I can see that works, but a problem is, in order to do all that, it would take a lot of time, but we need more agility. We don't have that time. So, it sounds like it would work for some things, but not for this. What do you think about that? And then they won't know what to say, because they'll realize, my approach actually might not work, you know, and they don't. So, but now you have their attention, and it's usually at that point, it's best to end the conversation so they have time to think about that. But then you need another conversation, you know, and now you have their attention. You have to become their ally. You have to become their trusted advisor, because it takes many conversations over time. I've turned people this way.
Yeah, the trust, and in some kind of level, it's a huge challenge, I can say.
It's your main job as a change agent, as you know, it's your main job, but you know, you spend most, you know, the problem is not in the teams. You know, you have to talk to teams to find out what people are really doing, but that's not where you change things. Where you change things is all these managers, you know, and you need the managers. We can't get rid of the managers, because you need the ecosystem to work. An ecosystem will not self-organize well. You know, a team might or might not, but you know, an ecosystem is not going to self-organize. What will happen is leaders will emerge, and you'll create power centers, ad hoc power centers within the if you have no structure to it. But you have to have the answer, the solution is to have the right kinds of leadership, the right kinds, not nasty, autocratic, self-serving. You need the right kind. So it's a cultural and behavioral issue. There's no easy answer for it. You have to shift the culture. You have to start at the top, and you have to be intentional about the kinds of leadership that get promoted and taught and encouraged and recognized, and the kinds of people who get empowered, who are, you know, giving someone authority of any kind is very dangerous, because people can misuse it. And so, you know, leaders need to be very thoughtful about who they empower with any kind of positional authority, but they have to. To organize an ecosystem, you have to give people authority to some degree, and you have to pick people who will use that well, whose behavior will be open and inquisitive and supportive, not autocratic and bossy. You know, but you have to give people authority so they can get people's attention, because everybody's busy.
That's true. Thank you so much, Cliff. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so Cliff, I know you got to get up early, and your voice, you have to protect your voice. So I'm going to go ahead and end the meetup tonight, and thank you very much for joining. This is recorded. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel, and I'll send a notification to everybody in the meetup once you're there. And the links and so forth, that information that Cliff put in the slide deck, maybe Cliff, you can send me the slide deck, and I'll also put that up in our Google site, and then everyone can get access to it and find out more. But you can Google that too, and it's out there, all the information. So again, thank you, Cliff, for joining us and educating us and informing us. And again, Cliff is very open. If you want to ask him questions, go to Agile 2 Google, you'll see his name. Just send him a note and he'll respond. And we can carry on the conversation. So again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Cliff. And stay tuned for the next session, I think is next month. And we have a good speaker coming to talk about some really cool stuff. So again, thank you everyone, and I'm going to say good night.
Good night. Thank you so much. It was a lot of good knowledge, and some of those I will use in practice. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.